"You once put a price on me," she said, her voice calm enough to disappear into the clink of champagne glasses. "So tell me, Ryan, what happens when I become something money can't buy?" The rooftop glittered in gold light, 100 feet above Manhattan, where the air felt thinner and colder, where deals were made with smiles that never reached the eyes. And tonight, Scarlett Hayes stood at the center of it all in a simple black dress that refused to compete, yet somehow silenced every louder color in the room. Across from her, Ryan Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks like he was sealing a transaction instead of ending a marriage. The skyline reflected in the glass behind him, sharp and distant. "Let's not make this emotional," he said, sliding a thin folder across the table between them. The paper stopping just inches from her hand like a quiet verdict. Inside it, numbers replaced memories, percentages replaced promises, and a clean exit replaced 5 years of building something that was never meant to be measured. Scarlett didn't reach for it right away, her fingers resting lightly against the cool marble surface, as if touching the past without grabbing onto it. The laughter from nearby guests floated over them, light, careless, unaware that something was being erased in real time. "You'll be taken care of," Ryan added, softer now, almost generous, as if kindness could be calculated into a payout. Scarlett finally lifted the folder, flipping it open with steady hands, her eyes scanning figures that reduced her to a line item, a number easy to write off, easy to forget. And for a brief second, the world narrowed to the quiet hum of the city below and the faint echo of who she used to be, the woman who believed in building something together, who stayed late, who fixed what he couldn't, who filled the gaps he never noticed. She closed the folder slowly, not with anger, not with hesitation, just a kind of stillness that felt heavier than both. "Is that all?" she asked, looking up at him, and Ryan exhaled, relieved, mistaking her composure for acceptance. "It's fair," he said, the word hanging in the air like a polished lie. Scarlett reached for the pen, her reflection catching in the glass behind him, small but unbroken, and without another word, she signed, the ink drying instantly as if the decision had been made long before tonight. She slid the folder back across the table, not pushing it, just letting it go. Ryan smiled, victorious, already turning slightly toward the future he had chosen, but Scarlett didn't move, not yet, her gaze drifting past him to the endless stretch of lights below, something shifting behind her eyes, something quiet, something final. And as the music swelled and the party carried on without noticing, Scarlett Hayes let go of the only place she had ever been underestimated. And in that silence, without spectacle or sound, she stepped into a version of herself no contract could ever define. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, as if the building itself needed time to adjust to the version of Scarlett Hayes who had just walked out of that rooftop, the soft hum of the descent replacing the music she had left behind. And in the reflection of the brushed steel walls, she saw it clearly for the first time. Not loss, not regret, but absence. The absence of needing to explain herself, the absence of waiting to be chosen. Her hand still loosely holding the pen she had used to sign away 5 years, she turned it slowly between her fingers before setting it down on the small console by the door, leaving it behind like it had never belonged to her in the first place. When the doors opened, the night air met her with a quiet chill, the kind that wakes you up without asking permission. The city stretched endlessly in front of her, loud and indifferent, taxis passing, headlights cutting through the dark, people moving with purpose, none of them knowing that somewhere above, a life had just been rewritten. Scarlett stepped onto the sidewalk, her heels steady against the concrete. No hesitation in her stride. She did not look back, not at the building, not at the man who believed he had just secured his future. Instead, she walked forward, each step lighter than the last, as if something invisible had been removed, something heavy she had carried for too long without realizing it. Her phone buzzed once in her hand, a message from an unknown number lighting up the screen. She glanced at it briefly, not stopping, not slowing, just a single line that read, "I have been looking for you." No name, no explanation, just that. She locked the screen without replying, slipping the phone back into her bag, not out of disinterest, but because for the first time in years, she did not feel the need to respond immediately to anything or anyone. The night unfolded around her in quiet layers. A passing reflection in a store window caught her eye. She paused for half a second, just enough to see the difference. The same woman, the same face, but something in her posture had shifted, her shoulders no longer carrying expectation, her eyes no longer searching for validation. There was space now, and in that space, something new was beginning to take shape. She continued walking until the city noise softened into a low background rhythm, until the lights blurred into something almost calm. And somewhere between one block and the next, Scarlet Haze crossed an invisible line, not from love to heartbreak, but from being defined to becoming undefined, from being measured to becoming something that could no longer be contained in numbers, and far above, in a room she no longer belonged to. A man celebrated a deal he believed he had won, unaware that the real transaction had already been completed the moment she chose to walk away without asking for anything back. Silence can feel louder than any argument when it is the last thing left between two people who once shared everything. And in the days that followed, Scarlet Haze did not try to fill that silence. She let it stretch, let it settle, let it become something solid beneath her feet, instead of something that needed to be escaped. Her apartment was smaller than the life she had just walked away from. Barely 800 square feet with a single window that faced another building instead of a skyline. But every morning the light still found its way in, soft and uninvited, resting on the edges of her kitchen counter where a single mug sat, still steaming, still hers. She moved slower now, not because she was lost, but because there was no one left to rush for, no schedule dictated by someone else's ambition, no expectations layered over her decisions, just space, quiet, and the steady rhythm of her own breath. She opened her laptop at the small wooden table near the window, the surface worn but clean, and began working, not for recognition, not for approval, but because it was hers to build, line by line, decision by decision. Outside, the city moved the same as always, relentless and loud, but inside, something had shifted into a different frequency, one that did not compete, one that did not need to be seen to exist. Her phone buzzed again that afternoon. The same unknown number, the same absence of identity. She stared at the screen for a moment longer this time. Reading the second message, "You walked away without negotiating." That is rare. There was no compliment in it, no curiosity disguised as charm, just an observation, precise and controlled. Scarlet did not smile, but her fingers hovered over the screen for a brief second before she placed the phone face down, not rejecting it, not accepting it, simply choosing not to be pulled. Hours passed, the sun shifting slowly across the floor, marking time without urgency, and somewhere in between reviewing contracts and drafting proposals, she realized something that had never been clear before. She was no longer trying to prove her worth to anyone, not to Ryan, not to the world that measured success in visible numbers, not even to herself. She simply existed within it, steady and unshaken. That evening, as the light dimmed and the city outside turned into scattered reflections, she finally picked up her phone again. Unlocking the screen with a calm that had nothing to do with hesitation, she typed just 3 words, measured and exact. "Who is this?" and pressed send. The reply came almost immediately, as if it had been waiting. Alexander Pierce. The name meant something, not loudly, not in the way headlines scream, but in the quiet recognition of influence that did not need introduction. Scarlet read it once, then again, not reacting, not overthinking, just letting it settle the same way everything else had, without resistance, without urgency, because for the first time, she understood something most people spent their lives chasing. Value was not something you asked others to see. It was something that revealed itself when you stopped asking at all. And somewhere beyond the glass towers and closed-door meetings, someone had already begun to notice. "Money is not power," he said quietly over the phone, his voice steady, almost detached. "Understanding it is." And for a moment, Scarlet Haze did not respond, not because she was surprised, but because the statement did not ask for a reaction. It simply existed, the same way he did, precise, controlled, and entirely certain of its place. She stood by the window of her apartment, the city stretched in muted tones beyond the glass. Early morning light casting long shadows across the floor. "You have been watching me," she said finally, not as a question, but as a recognition. There was a pause on the other end, not defensive, not rushed, just measured. I observe patterns, Alexander Pierce replied. And you broke one. Scarlett's reflection stared back at her, still, composed, unchanged on the surface yet entirely different underneath. Most people negotiate when they are being bought out, he continued. You did not ask for more. You did not argue. You did not try to prove your value. His voice lowered slightly, not in volume, but in weight. You removed yourself from the equation. Scarlett let the words settle, not resisting them, not embracing them, simply placing them where they belonged. And that interested you, she said, her tone even. Alexander did not answer immediately, but when he did, there was no hesitation. No, he said. It confirmed something. She turned slightly, leaning against the edge of the window frame, the cool surface grounding her. And what is that? She asked, the city below beginning to wake, distant traffic forming a quiet rhythm. That you already understand what most people spend their entire lives trying to learn, he said. That value is not negotiated in the moment. It is built long before anyone sits at the table. Silence followed. But it was not empty. It was full, layered with something neither of them needed to name. Scarlett glanced at her laptop resting open on the table. Contracts still waiting, work still unfinished, a life still in motion. Why are you telling me this? She asked, not out of suspicion, but out of clarity. Alexander's response came without delay. Because I do not invest in people who need to be convinced of their worth, he said. And you do not. The words did not feel like praise. They felt like assessment, like a line drawn with intention. Scarlett exhaled slowly, not releasing tension, but acknowledging the shift. So this is an investment, she said, her voice steady. Alexander's tone did not change. Everything is, he replied. The only question is whether it grows or disappears. She looked out at the city again, the movement, the noise, the endless transactions happening without meaning. And for the first time, she saw it differently, not as something to survive, but as something to understand. What do you want? She asked. Not because she was unsure, but because she was ready to define the terms. Alexander paused, just long enough to make the next words deliberate. A conversation, he said. In person, Scarlett's grip on the phone did not tighten. Her posture did not shift. Nothing about her outwardly changed, but something aligned quietly beneath the surface, the same way it had the night she walked away without looking back. Tomorrow, she said, not asking, not negotiating, simply placing it where it belonged. Alexander responded with a single word, agreed. And as the call ended, Scarlett Hayes stood in the quiet of her apartment, no longer at the edge of something uncertain, but at the beginning of something she was fully prepared to step into, not because she needed it, but because she understood exactly what it was worth. The cafe did not try to impress anyone, and that was exactly why it was chosen. Tucked between two glass towers that reflected more ambition than authenticity, its interior warm but understated, the kind of place where conversations mattered more than appearances. Scarlett Hayes arrived 5 minutes early, not out of nervousness, but out of habit. Her steps measured, her presence quiet. She chose a table near the window where the morning light softened everything it touched, placing her phone on the table without checking it, her attention already anchored in the moment rather than scattered across it. When Alexander Pierce walked in, he did not scan the room like someone searching. He moved like someone who already knew where to look. His gaze found her without hesitation, and there was no dramatic pause, no shift in atmosphere, just a subtle alignment of two people who understood the value of timing. He took the seat across from her without unnecessary gestures, setting his cup down with precision. You chose a place without distractions, he said, not as a compliment, but as an observation. Scarlett met his eyes evenly. I prefer conversations that do not compete, she replied, her voice steady, the kind that did not need to rise to be heard. A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, not forced, simply present, as if both of them were allowing the moment to define itself before stepping into it. Alexander leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but deliberate. Most people think wealth is about accumulation, he said, his tone measured, but it is actually about control. Scarlett did not interrupt, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table, grounded, attentive. Control of time, control of decisions, control of where your energy goes, he continued. And most importantly, control of what you walk away from. The last sentence lingered between them, not heavy, but precise. Scarlett's gaze did not shift, but something behind it sharpened. Walking away is not always control, she said. Sometimes it is the only option left. Alexander shook his head slightly, not dismissing her, but refining the thought. No, he said quietly. Staying when you are undervalued is the lack of control. The distinction settled into the space between them, clear and undeniable. Scarlett leaned back just enough to create space, not distance. So what is this? She asked, not curious, not cautious, simply direct. Alexander did not hesitate. A partnership, he said, the word placed carefully, without decoration, without persuasion. I do not need someone to follow instructions, he continued. I need someone who already understands how to move without being told. Scarlett studied him for a moment, not searching for flaws, not testing his words, but measuring alignment. And what makes you think I would be interested? She asked, her tone even. Alexander's expression did not change. Because you are not looking for security, he said. You are looking for leverage. The word landed differently, sharper, more exact. Scarlett's lips curved almost imperceptibly, not a smile, but an acknowledgement. And you believe you can offer that, she said. Alexander did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and placed a thin folder on the table, sliding it toward her with the same controlled motion she had seen before. But this time, the meaning was entirely different. I do not offer leverage, he said, his voice calm. I create environments where it already exists. Scarlett looked at the folder, then back at him, not reaching for it yet, not rushing the moment, because for the first time, she was not being presented with a number. She was being presented with a choice, and choices, she had learned, were where real power began. Scarlett Hayes did not open the folder immediately, not because she was uncertain, but because she understood that timing was part of control. Her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the paper as the quiet hum of the cafe settled around them. Conversations blending into a soft background that did not demand attention. Alexander Pierce did not rush her, did not fill the silence with persuasion. He simply watched, not her reaction, but her process. And when she finally lifted the folder, it was with the same calm precision she had used the night she signed her name away. Only this time, nothing about her was being reduced. The pages inside were clean, structured, intentional, projections, strategies, equity structures that were not built on quick returns but on long-term positioning. Scarlett's eyes moved steadily across each line, not impressed, not intimidated, just absorbing, understanding, translating. She closed the folder after a moment, placing it back on the table without a sound. You are not offering me a role, she said, her voice even. Alexander nodded once. No, he replied. I am offering you access. The word settled differently. It did not imply obligation. It implied possibility. Scarlett leaned back slightly, her gaze steady on him. Access to what? She asked, not because she did not see it, but because she wanted to hear how he defined it. Alexander's response came without hesitation. To rooms where decisions are made before they are announced, he said. To conversations that shape outcomes long before anyone else knows they exist. Scarlett did not react outwardly, but something beneath her stillness aligned with the precision of his words. And what do you expect in return? She asked, not cautious, just exact. Alexander's expression remained unchanged. Clarity, he said. Not agreement, not obedience, just clarity. Scarlett's eyes held his for a fraction longer, measuring not the offer, but the weight behind it. Most people ask for loyalty, she said. Alexander shook his head slightly. Loyalty without clarity is just dependency, he replied. And dependency has no value in the environments I operate in. The distinction was sharp, deliberate, leaving no space for misinterpretation. Scarlett glanced once more at the folder, then back at him. And you believe I already understand this, she said. Alexander did not soften his tone. I do not believe, he said. I observed. The simplicity of it carried more weight than any reassurance could. Scarlett let the silence stretch for a moment longer, not searching for doubt, not needing confirmation, just allowing the decision to form without pressure. Outside the window, The city continued its endless motion, people moving, deals happening, numbers shifting, all of it loud in its own way, but inside that small cafe, the quiet felt more powerful than all of it combined. "I am not interested in being managed," she said finally, her voice steady. Alexander nodded once, as if that had already been accounted for. "That is why this works," he replied. Scarlett picked up the folder again, not as someone being handed an opportunity, but as someone evaluating an alignment, her fingers closing around it with calm certainty. "Then we are not negotiating," she said, her tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. Alexander's gaze did not shift. "No," he said, "we are deciding." And in that moment, the difference between being chosen and choosing became unmistakably clear. Scarlett Hayes did not ask for terms, did not adjust the offer. She simply stood, placing the folder under her arm, her movements unhurried, deliberate. "Then I will see you in those rooms," she said, and without waiting for confirmation, she walked away, not from him, but towards something that no longer needed to be explained, because this time, she was not stepping into a deal. She was stepping into a position that had already been hers to claim. The room was quieter than expected for a place where millions of dollars could change direction in a single sentence. A long glass table stretching across the center, sunlight cutting through floor to ceiling windows and reflecting off polished surfaces that revealed nothing and concealed everything. Scarlett Hayes stepped in without hesitation, her heels echoing softly against the marble floor, not loud enough to demand attention, but precise enough to be noticed by those who understood presence without performance. Around the table sat men and women who had spent decades being listened to, their posture relaxed, their expressions controlled, conversations low and measured. And at the far end, Ryan Whitmore stood beside a digital screen, mid-presentation, his voice steady, confident, the kind of confidence built on numbers he believed were finally strong enough to carry him into rooms like this. He did not see her at first, his focus fixed on projections, on growth charts, on the future he was trying to secure. Scarlett took her seat without interruption, placing a thin folder in front of her, her movements aligned with the rhythm of the room rather than against it. Alexander Pierce sat to her right, not introducing her, not announcing her presence, because in this environment, introductions were unnecessary when position already spoke. "As you can see," Ryan continued, gesturing toward the screen, "this expansion will double returns within 18 months. His voice carried just enough authority to hold attention, but not enough to dominate it. And then, as if guided by something subtle and unavoidable, his gaze shifted, scanning the table, moving from one face to another until it stopped. His words faltered for the smallest fraction of a second, barely noticeable to most, but undeniable to those who paid attention. "Scarlett," he said, her name landing awkwardly in a space that was not designed for personal history. She did not react immediately, did not offer acknowledgement beyond a steady gaze that neither welcomed nor rejected him, just existed, neutral and unmoved. The room did not shift, no one asked questions, but the air adjusted slightly, like a silent recalibration. Ryan cleared his throat, regaining composure, continuing his presentation as if nothing had changed, but something had, not in volume, not in structure, but in control. Because now, every number he spoke, every projection he defended, existed under her observation, and she did not take notes, did not interrupt, did not signal approval or doubt. She simply listened, her stillness more unsettling than any objection could have been. Minutes passed, the presentation reaching its conclusion, Ryan standing there, waiting for response, for evaluation, for validation from a room that held his future in quiet balance. Alexander leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable, and then, without looking at her, he spoke. "Scarlett." Just her name, nothing more, no explanation, no direction, and the room turned, not dramatically, but inevitably, toward her. Scarlett placed her hands lightly on the table, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady on Ryan, the same man who once reduced her to a number, now standing in front of her asking, without words, to be measured. The silence stretched, not empty, but precise, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, controlled, and impossible to ignore. "Walk me through your assumptions again," she said, not raising her tone, not challenging, just requesting clarity. And in that moment, the balance shifted completely, because this was no longer his presentation, it was her evaluation. And for the first time, Ryan Whitmore was no longer the one deciding value. He was the one being asked to prove it. Ryan Whitmore nodded once, but the confidence he had walked in with no longer sat as comfortably on his shoulders. He turned back to the screen, tapping to the previous slide, numbers reappearing, projections stretching across the wall in clean, convincing lines. The growth is driven by market expansion and strategic partnerships, he said, his voice steady again, but tighter now, more deliberate. Scarlett Hayes did not interrupt, her gaze fixed not on the screen, but on him, watching not what he showed, but how he held it together. Your expansion assumes stability in a market that has not been stable for the last 12 months, she said calmly, her tone even, not challenging, just precise. Ryan hesitated for a fraction of a second, adjusting his stance. We accounted for that with flexible scaling, he replied, gesturing again. But the movement lacked the ease it had moments before. Scarlett leaned slightly forward, her hands still resting lightly on the table. Flexible scaling is not a strategy, she said. It is a response. The distinction landed quietly, but it shifted the weight of the conversation. A few people around the table exchanged subtle glances, not reacting outwardly, but registering the shift. Ryan exhaled slowly, recalibrating. The projections are conservative, he added, his voice firming, trying to reclaim ground. Scarlett's expression did not change. Conservative compared to what? She asked, not raising her voice, not pressing, just placing the question exactly where it needed to be. The silence that followed was not long, but it was enough to expose the gap between confidence and certainty. Ryan moved to the next slide, numbers adjusting, explanations layering, but now each word felt like it needed support, like it had to prove its place instead of simply existing. Scarlett listened without interruption, her stillness consistent, her presence unshaken, until he finished, the final slide fading into a neutral screen, the room quiet again, waiting, not for him this time, but for her. Scarlett sat back slightly, her gaze steady, not cold, not distant, just clear. You built this on momentum, she said, her voice calm. But momentum is not control. Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. You are asking for investment based on where you believe this is going, she continued. But you have not shown who is directing it. The words were not harsh. They were exact, leaving no space for misinterpretation. Alexander remained silent beside her, his attention forward, allowing the moment to belong entirely to her. Scarlett paused briefly, not for effect, but because nothing needed to be rushed. Do you still believe everything has a price? She asked, her eyes holding his. The question simple, but carrying something deeper beneath it, something that reached beyond the room, beyond the numbers, beyond the presentation itself. Ryan looked at her, really looked at her now, not as someone from his past, but as the person sitting across from him, the one holding his future in a way he had never anticipated. The realization settled slowly, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable, and for the first time since he began speaking, he did not have an immediate answer. The room remained still, the air measured, waiting, and Scarlett Hayes did not fill the silence for him, because this was no longer about what he could present. It was about what he understood, and in that moment, understanding was the only currency that mattered. The silence did not break. It settled, firm and unyielding, stretching across the glass table like something that could not be negotiated. Ryan Whitmore stood there, the weight of his own question pressing back at him, and for the first time, the numbers behind him felt distant, almost irrelevant, as if they belonged to a version of himself that no longer had control of the room. Scarlett Hayes did not look away, her gaze steady, not demanding, not waiting, simply present, giving him the space to answer or to understand why he could not. A subtle shift moved through the room, not visible, but undeniable, the kind that happens when authority changes hands without a single raised voice. Ryan exhaled slowly, his posture adjusting, not collapsing, but recalibrating. No, he said finally, the word quiet, but clear enough to settle into every corner of the room. Scarlett did not react, Not with satisfaction, not with acknowledgement, just a slight pause as if placing that answer exactly where it belonged. Then you understand the problem, she said, her voice calm, precise. The same tone she had carried from the moment she walked in. She reached for the folder in front of her, opening it with measured ease. Not to review, not to reconsider, but to conclude. Your projections are built on expectation, not control, she continued. And expectation does not scale. The words were not harsh. They were final. Alexander Pierce remained still beside her, his silence reinforcing rather than interrupting. Scarlett closed the folder gently, the soft sound echoing more than it should have in a room this controlled. This is not a viable investment, she said, not raising her voice, not softening it either, just placing the decision exactly where it belonged. Ryan nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition, the kind that comes too late to change the outcome. The screen behind him dimmed, the presentation over without ceremony, without resistance, because there was nothing left to argue. Scarlett stood, her movements unhurried, composed, the same way she had entered, the same way she had left everything behind before. She did not look at him again, not out of avoidance, but because there was nothing left to measure, nothing left to resolve. Alexander rose beside her, not leading, not following, simply aligned, and together they moved toward the door, the quiet authority of their steps carrying more weight than any approval ever could. As the door opened, the light from the hallway spilling in, Scarlett paused for the smallest fraction of a second, not turning back, just enough to let the moment settle into something permanent, something that would not need to be revisited. You once turned me into a number, she said, her voice steady, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Now you understand what it means to be evaluated. She stepped forward, the door closing softly behind her, sealing the room, the decision, and everything that came with it. And as the sound faded, what remained was not victory in the way most people defined it. There was no celebration, no visible triumph, just the quiet certainty of someone who had stepped beyond being measured, beyond being compared, into something far more powerful, something that did not need validation to exist, because she had not taken anything from him. She had simply become something he could never reach.